Good morning, everybody. My name's Lauren. I'm the host for the Finding Opportunities in the Public Sector webinar today. I'm very happy to be here. Before we do get started, I am just going to leave a few moments to give everybody who has registered for today's session the chance to join. I do appreciate you all being here with us today. So I will firstly go into just a little housekeeping, but I will start this now. I'll just repeat myself before we do get started. But to let you know that today's session is being recorded, you will receive a copy of the recording following today's session along with a copy of the slide deck. The slide deck that we do share will include live links, so any of the live links that you do see throughout today's session, you will be able to follow in slower time. And as I say, with you receiving the slide deck, do feel free to make any notes. If you do have any questions, please do let me know. We have the chat function available today. I believe we're due to have a Q&A function live as well, but I don't seem able to see that. If you do have any questions, if you pop them in the chat function just to be safe. But yes, questions are welcomed throughout today's session. I will pause throughout just to check whether there are any questions within the chat, but also I have also left some time towards the end for some questions. We have set aside 45 minutes for today's session, but we may get wrapped up a little sooner, obviously dependent on the number of questions throughout and the level of which how quickly I speak. So I do think we are about ready to get started now. So just moving on then to some introductions, the agenda, and as I mentioned, a little bit of housekeeping. So as I did just mention, do feel free to ask any questions throughout using that Q&A function. Again, session is being recorded and we will send a copy of the recording and the slides out to all registered attendees. So if somebody did register on your behalf, it may be that you'd need to request a copy of the slides and the recording from whoever registered you. So a quick introduction from myself then. So my name's Lauren Siddons. If you have been attending Go for Growth website and webinars, should I say, for a while, you may recognise my face. I did work with Go for Growth back up until mid-2024. I've been away for just around a year, but now I'm back working alongside Go for Growth with their partnership with Nexus Multi Academy Trust. So during today's session then, we will be covering a number of things. So why public sector contracts may be of interest to you and your organisation. We'll be taking a look at the process of which you would be likely to follow when looking at bidding for public sector work. We'll talk a little bit around the processes that you may come across for below threshold opportunities, but also the main thing that we'll be covering regarding the process is a above threshold kind of process and the types of documentation that you are likely to see when bidding for public sector work for a regulated procurement. Next then, so we'll be looking briefly at where you can find opportunities. I will be mentioning where to find opportunities during the process element of today's webinar, but then what we will also be doing is running away from this slide deck, and I'll be doing a quick demonstration of the Find a Tender service. For any of you who, if I've mentioned anything up to now that's making no sense, for example, say thresholds or the Find a Tender service, this is all things that we will cover off during today's session. But again, any questions, do just let me know. Before we finish, we'll be looking at some general information of things that you may want to consider when looking to access the public sector to kind of ensure that you are ready to access this public sector work. So elements that you may want to consider before bidding and questions to maybe be asking yourself to understand what types of opportunities would be out there for your organisation. And finally, before finishing, we will just be taking a quick look into the support that you are able to take from Go for Growth. Any support that you do take at any point in time from Go for Growth is completely free of charge. So we just want to give you an overview of that. So you, if you are interested, you have the ability to take advantage, you know exactly what we have to offer. Brilliant. So we're going to go straight into then exploring why public sector contracts. So I won't dwell on this element too much, but I do want to briefly explore why the public sector is a good potential customer, especially for small businesses. Now, the way in which that you or your organisation may find yourself looking to work with the public sector, it can differ. For example, your organisation may be looking to bid directly for a contract, or this may be as part of a collaboration or consortia. But you may also look at working for a contracting authority or for the public sector via the supply chain as a subcontractor. Now, what Go for Growth are trying to achieve with the service that we offer is to provide smaller organisations with the right resources to build their knowledge and build confidence, so that if you do identify an opportunity and are looking to place a bid directly to the public sector, that you have all of the necessary tools to be able to do so. We want you to feel confident. We want you to be familiar with the documentation that you may come across. But we also want you to be aware of the support that is out there, the processes that are in place. So say, for example, in a public sector opportunity, there will be there'll be a period called a clarification period, wherein which you are able to ask the contracting authority questions about the opportunity. But something to be aware of that is that that clarification period doesn't last the entire tender process. So it's something to, when we are talking you through the types of documentation that you will come across, we'll highlight these types of things. And these are, we do deeper dives into specific tender documentation, but also looking at timelines, understanding what deadlines for certain things are. So the clarification deadline, to ensure that if you do have any questions about the process, so say, for example, there is a quality question that you've been asked to respond to, and you're not entirely sure, you've interpreted the question in a certain way, but maybe it's slightly ambiguous, so it could be taken in a different way, and you want to clarify with the contracting authority exactly what way in which they are asking you or looking for you to respond to that question. That's what the clarification period is there for. Gives you the opportunity to ask any questions, and the contracting authority, those looking to purchase that said service or goods, you get the answer direct from them. Just take a quick drink there. So moving on then, so just a quick look into public sector contracts and why they could be a good option for your organisation. So I've highlighted some of the key reasons why I believe this to be the case on screen, but we are going to run through these in a little more detail. So the last government, they actually set a mandate to place 33% of all spend with small to medium enterprises in a bid to deliver public good. So public good is often termed as social value within the public sector, which I'm sure if any of you have already been exploring opportunities in the public sector, if you've been reading through tender documentation, the way in which markings are given, you'll see some form of wording regarding social value. Now, in the public sector, there's something called the Public Services Act, or the Social Value Act, which was assented to law back in January 2013. The act itself was enacted, I believe it was I've got it written down, it was enacted in 2012. So the act requires public bodies to consider how contracts can improve the economic, social and environmental well-being of the area in which they serve. So this means going beyond just cost and quality elements to think about the actual social and economic impact that every pound of taxpayers' money they spend is, what is it achieving, basically. And there's almost certainly opportunities for everybody or for all organisations within the public sector. So whether that is via a grant funding route or whether this is via public sector contracts, which is what we, of course, are today kind of homing in on. And I mean, there's a real drive and a real ambition, as we can see from the things I've already mentioned, to place more business with SMEs, including micro and sole traders. And I mean, there can be some real positives around working for the public sector, and there is something called the National Procurement Policy Statement. Now, this was released back in February, and the policy reinforces basically the actual current government's desire to also support the marketplace. What the policy effectively covers or describes is what is important to every public procurement activity that goes out to the market. And this includes things such as what they outline is supporting SME and voluntary sector organisations, including sole traders and micro businesses again. And that is kind of like by breaking down barriers to entry, making these opportunities more accessible. So say, for example, within a tender exercise, if they are looking for certain licenses, accreditations, insurances. So say, for example, a cyber essentials certification is required as a mandatory element or a mandatory thing for a bidder to have as part of the tender exercise. To make the opportunity more accessible, it's now, the ask is not that you have the Cyber Essentials accreditation in place when you submit the bid, but it's more of a promise that you will have those things in place by the time that the contract goes live if you are successful. And I mean, these are again things that you could ask clarifications around when you are reviewing tender documentation. So if you see within a tender exercise the request for providers to have a Cyber Essentials accreditation, but it doesn't say to be in place by the point that the contract goes live, you're well within your rights to raise that clarification question and say, we don't have this accreditation at this point in time, but is it acceptable for us to make the promise that if we were to be successful in our bid, we will have the accreditation in place by the time that the contract goes live. So other things that the policy looks at is tackling things such as carbon reduction and also the building of skills both in the procurement community but also within the marketplace. So this looks at, obviously we at Go for Growth are focused on developing skills within the marketplace, running webinars such as these and working alongside public sector contracting authorities to help develop the skills of those looking to bid for work, basically. But then also there is the aim for the procurement community to increase their knowledge as well as to how they can support the marketplace to access their opportunities. How can we make procurement activities more accessible overall? So in addition to this, another thing to highlight is the new regulations for public procurement. So these came into effect in February this year. So that is the Procurement Act 2023. The Procurement Act also places greater emphasis on removing barriers to entry, which again is fantastic news for smaller organisations and for the voluntary sector. So we've kind of covered some of the reasons why public sector contracts may be attractive to smaller organisations at this point in time, but also we wanted to highlight this to give you the opportunity to understand that the public sector are wanting to work with you and they want to make opportunities more accessible to you, and that's why we are working toward why Go for Growth are doing the work that we are doing, basically. So I am going to move forward to start looking at the types of processes that you are likely to see when you are bidding for work within the public sector. So in terms of the process then, so one of the useful things about public sector procurement is that there are things called thresholds. So I mentioned thresholds right towards the beginning of this session. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with what I'm referring to with the term thresholds, it means the value at which the procurement regulations kick in and contracting authorities are required to follow when running a procurement. So those thresholds, when it comes to public sector procurement, for goods and service, the threshold, including VAT, is £214,904. If we're looking more at a type of a construction or works contract, the threshold for this is much higher. It's at this point in time just below £5.4 million. And then there is also something called the light touch regime, which is for services typically concerned contracts for like social care or education, say for example, and the threshold for this is sitting just below 664,000. So what those thresholds effectively mean is the total contract value over the life of the contract. If the figure is going to be above that amount, the regulations or the Procurement Act 2023 is then enforced, which ensures a level of consistency as to how public sector opportunities work. Now, I did mention that we'd look at exploring opportunities and how they work below threshold. So often small businesses are working at a much lower level than these threshold amounts. Now, under the threshold amounts, every public sector authority will effectively or ideally publish their own rules or guidance as to how they will procure for the for amounts below the threshold. So say, for example, a contracting authority procuring something worth, say, the contract value overall is a total of £10,000 or £20,000. They will have what could be each contracting authority will name a different thing, but say, for example, we will have at Nexus thresholds. We just call them our thresholds. And say, for example, if the contract value is £10,000, our rule for contracts of this value is that we will go out and get 3 formal written quotations for this service. But that's not necessarily the case across the public sector. As I say, each contracting authority will have their own rules, but these tend to be public-facing documents. So if you were to visit the contracting authority which you want to kind of scope out, say you're looking maybe say, I can't think of a contracting authority off the top of my head, but say you're interested in finding out how Nexus procure below threshold. You could go to the procurement element of our website and take a look through our procurement policy. It's the procurement policy where you'd find the thresholds for Nexus, and we will give a breakdown of how we will purchase from all values from naught up until the threshold amounts, where in which we of course then need to follow the regulations. Now, I do apologise that I keep pausing to take a drink. I've just got a little bit of a dry throat. So I'm just going to check the chat function to see if there's anything in there at the moment whilst I take a quick drink. So I can't see anything at the moment. And one thing that I am just a little cautious of is, with there being no Q&A function when I was expecting one, would it be okay that I ask somebody to just please try and pop a quick message into the chat just so that I can make sure it is working as expected? That's perfect. Thank you very much, Becky. Okay, so moving forward then, I do have my notes here, so apologies that I keep referring back to them, but I just don't want to miss anything that I've written down in advance that I feel extremely important to share. So going back to the process that we highlighted on screen then, so that just move my chat function. So this is typically the process that you'll come across for contracts that are above those thresholds. So these are the regulated procurements, and you are likely to see similar processes to this for contracts with lower with an overall lower value. It's not to say that these similar processes won't be followed, it's just that they have to be followed above those threshold amounts. Exactly what you will see within this process can differ ever so slightly because there are different types of documentation. Contracting authorities will name documents different things, but overall it will be a very similar process. And the more you do get involved in the tender activity, the more this will all be kind of come second nature to you as an organisation. But again, as I do keep referring back to, I'll come back to this question in just a moment, Ash, so that I can just read that in more detail. But no, I'll come back to that. In fact, no, I'll answer it now. So Ash has raised a question regarding the fact that they are on the CCS low value framework. Does that mean that organisations can spend up to 214k with us via this framework? So the answer to that is no, not necessarily. So there will be an overall contract value, and you are one provider to that framework. So there will be a number of providers who've been appointed to that framework. Now, the contracting authority or contracting authorities, the CCS framework has an overall value. If the overall value is achieved, to say it's 500 million, if the amount spent under that framework reaches 500 million, no further work should go via that framework. So there isn't a value of what a contracting authority can spend with you, but there is a value of what spend can go via that framework that you've been appointed to. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, please just pop another note in there. And if you would like to discuss that in any further detail, I mean, you will see this when we come towards the end of the call, but we do, I think so, that's good. We do have a one-to-one mentoring session option, so you can book a call with us to discuss anything in more detail. But yes, if you've been appointed to a framework, the framework itself has a maximum value, and that is spent for all suppliers under that framework. If the overall value is achieved, then no more work goes through it. But perfect, yes, do book a call in if you feel that would be useful. Thank you. So again, coming back to the process then, so pre-market engagement. So there is much more focus on engaging the market early at the moment via pre-market engagement. So this is before the competition or the option to quote goes live. Now, the purpose of pre-market engagement, basically for the contracting authority, is to engage the market, to understand the capability of the market, how things, trends may have changed since since the contracting authority last procured what they're going out to market for, or if this is the first time that they've gone out to market, to understand what is out there, what the capacity is, what the capability is, what competition's like, but also to get some feedback. So you, as a provider to the market, if you are taking part in pre-market engagement activity, it gives you the chance not only to kind of give an introduction, if you're attending whether it's a webinar, whether it's an in-person meet the buyer event, where you have the opportunity to discuss these upcoming tender processes or tender activities, it gives you a chance not only to kind of introduce yourself to the contracting authority, which I mean wouldn't make a difference to what you submit in the end, but it just gives you an introduction to the contracting authority so that they know who you are. If you do submit a bid, they know that they've met you at this pre-market engagement event for then, say, for example, opportunities that are below threshold. If there's a below threshold opportunity and they are inviting, say, 5 written formal quotations, if they know that you're a provider that offers this type of service, they may then have you in mind to ask you to submit a quotation for that type of work. But also another way in which that these pre-market engagement events can be useful is because it gives you the chance to try and also help inform the process. So if the contracting authority present to you what they're looking to buy and how they want to buy it, and you think as a provider, well, actually, I think that it would make more sense for this to work in ... way. You have the ability at this point in time to raise those ideas, or if there's any concerns, you're speaking with the contracting authority because they are trying to make the best decision based on the information that they are receiving from the market. Now, these, as under the Procurement Act 2023, there are actually notices that contracting authorities are required to publish when it comes to pre-market engagement. So these are called preliminary market engagement notices. Now, contracting authorities have to post this, or if they don't post one of these, if they do decide that they're not going to partake in pre-market engagement, then when they post the actual tender opportunity, they need to explain why they didn't partake in pre-market engagement. So we will come to the Find a Tender service and the central digital platform, which I will just state is basically the same thing, but I'll go more into that later in today's session. But the preliminary market engagement notices will be published to the Find a Tender service. So what we are advising organisations or suppliers or potential suppliers to be doing is ensuring that if you are searching the Find a Tender service, and some of you will be aware of what the service is or what the central digital platform is, but basically it's a government hosted portal wherein which contract or tender opportunities are advertised via the public sector contracting authorities. But as I said, other notices are now also published to this to the portal, including the preliminary market engagement notices. So when you are doing these searches, what we're advising is that it makes sense for you as a supplier to be ensuring that you're searching for the preliminary market engagement notices to ensure that you can get involved in those early stages and that you're not missing out on any of that early opportunity stuff. Just making sure I've not gone too far ahead and skipped anything. So yes, just one more thing about the preliminary market engagement notice. So it does provide information about how the contracting authority will be engaging suppliers, so what their plans are, so whether that will be a webinar, whether that will be in person, or how they have already done that if it has already taken place. And again, the notice must be published before a tender notice is published. And if one isn't posted, there needs to be the explanation within the tender notice why there wasn't. So moving on to then, once an above threshold opportunity does go live, this will be advertised, again, using a government hosted portal, so using the Find a Tender service. For below threshold opportunities, you may find, Becky, you've just asked a question regarding the notice. So the pipeline notice is the one before the preliminary market engagement notice. So what I will do, we'll go through the notices. I've got a full list of the notices that contracting authorities are required to publish in line with the new regulations. So what I will do, it's a couple of slides on, it might actually be the next one. Bear with me a second, but we'll come to that in just a moment and you'll be able to see all the different types of notices, okay? And then again, any questions, if I don't have the answer off the bat, I can come to that. I'll respond to any other questions in slower time following today's session. But yes, so contracting authorities are required to advertise the opportunities if they are above threshold. If they are below threshold, so there's also another government hosted portal named Contracts Finder. I'm not going to go into Contracts Finder too much today, but if you would like further information on it, or if it would be helpful, I can pop a link to it in our follow-up email this afternoon, but it is for lower value opportunities. I believe it's 12,000 and above for central government that you would find posted on Contracts Finder at this point in time. But for the above threshold opportunities, it is the Finder Tender Service, also known as the Central Digital Platform. And as I have mentioned, you will hear me refer to both the Central Digital Platform and the Finder Tender Service today. And again, I just want to clarify that that is the same site. It's just different elements to the one site. So the advertisement that the contracting authority posts to the Finder Tender Service will basically provide an overview of the opportunity at hand. So it will include information such as the contract value, the location of the contract, and a brief description of what it is that they are looking to purchase, and maybe, so you're likely to see the date that the tender went live, but also the submission deadline, which is, of course, very important day. So when you are doing a search of the Finder Tender Service, which again, we are going to be doing a demo of very shortly, and I'll show you an example of this, you want to be looking at those specific dates. So if you are looking, so today is the 9th of September, if you're doing a search and you come across an opportunity which has a deadline of the 15th of September, it's a very small window of time, unless it is a smaller opportunity with less documentation to review, to respond to. It may be that a 6-day period just does not leave you simply with enough time to respond to that opportunity. So it may be that when you think, not this time, but you're aware of the fact that that is something that contracting authority does procure, and you can make a note of it to understand when that contract, once it has been awarded, does come to an end, so you know when to next be looking out for that opportunity. So you can take part in it the next time around. But again, 6 days may be something that you are suitable with. It's all dependent on your capacity as an organisation, the time that you have to be able to set aside for bidding for an opportunity, basically. But also, as we did mention, there is the other time scales within that. So there's a thing called a tender timeline. And as we mentioned, there's a clarification period. The clarification period normally expires around a week before the submissions are due. So if you did only have 6 days, it may be that you just wouldn't have the opportunity to ask any clarifications regarding that opportunity. But coming back to the advertisement anyway, so other than what we have already discussed, the advertisement will give some instructions to bidders as to where they would then look to actually bid for the work, and to download the tender documentation in order to form a response. And that is that will be, usually it may be that you respond to the instructions via an email, but what you're likely to see with these above threshold opportunities is that contracting authorities have their own e-tender portal. Now, I'm not sure, of course, how familiar you all will be with tender portals, but just to name a few, just in case any of you are familiar with them, if you are based, say, for example, within the Yorkshire and Humber region, contracting authorities in this region tend to use the portal called Your Tender, also known as EU Supply. This is where their opportunities are all posted. So they're advertised by a Finder Tender Service, but they're also advertised by their specific tender portal, which you as a supplier would need to register for. You would then express interest or register your interest in the opportunity that they've posted, and that will give you access to the tender documentation. And that's kind of what we're going to be looking at next. So the documentation that we list the invitation to tender, the specification, evaluation criteria and weightings. But before I do run on to the actual documentation that you'll come across, I quickly want to just run over the procurement specific questionnaire. So the procurement specific questionnaire consists of 3 parts. Now, it's a tool designed by contracting authorities to help ensure that suppliers provide the specific information that they need to verify a supplier's legal, financial, and technical capabilities. The central digital platform does have, when you will register for the central digital platform. Now, to search for an opportunity via Find a Tender service or the central digital platform, you're not required to have an account. You can just open the website and do a search. But when you do find an opportunity that you are interested in bidding for, it is then mandatory that you register as a supplier to the central digital platform, and you will fill in a full questionnaire, which will form part of the procurement specific questionnaire to avoid you repeatedly having to provide this information for each individual opportunity. So under the previous regulations, there was a thing called the standard selection questionnaire. And as part of every single tender exercise that you take part in, you would provide a response to the selection questionnaire. Now, you will provide a response to the procurement specific questionnaire, as that is specific to each individual opportunity, but it's less bulky than the SSQ was, as, like I say, when you register for the central digital platform, you'll input some basic information which will be transferred over to each opportunity that you bid for with your unique code that you're given once you've completed your registration to the central digital platform. So looking at some of the documentation then that you are likely to come across when bidding for public sector work. So the invitation to tender. So the invitation to tender is usually a document which lays out how the process is going to work for that specific opportunity. So this is where you'll find the tender timeline that we've discussed. So when the opportunity went out to market, the clarification period, so when your deadline for clarifications is, when the submissions are due in, so the submission deadline, the evaluation period, so what dates the evaluation will take place to and from, and when you are likely to have a response from the contracting authority letting you know whether you have been successful or not. For above threshold opportunities, there will be a standstill period, so it'll give you an idea of when that standstill period will be over. The standstill period is the time in which you are able to raise questions about the outcome of the tender. But then following that standstill period, that is when the contract award will be formally made and the contract does go live. So yes, the invitation to tender will include that tender timeline, but in addition to the tender timeline, this may be where you will find the specification. So each tender opportunity, there will be a specification, which you may find within the invitation to tender, and this may be a separate document completely. As I mentioned previously in today's session, the way in which contracting authorities will run this process will differ ever so slightly. So it may be a specification, all of the documentation that you need may be within that one invitation to tender, but it may be that there are separate documents which cover all of this information. The invitation to tender for one contracting authority may just be the instructions, may just be where they outline how your response to the opportunity is going to be scored, the timescales, the instructions or main contacts, for example, and then the specification may be a completely separate document, or it may be all in one. What the purpose of the specification then, it outlines exactly what the contracting authority is looking to purchase. And again, dependent on the value of the opportunity, the specification may be very detailed, or it may be open to, so if the contracting authority has a requirement which they're happy for you to tell them how you would provide the service. They'll tell you a basic idea of what they're needing, and then within your response to the opportunity, you have the option or the ability to tell them the story of how you think you should best deliver that service or the product that they're looking to purchase, if that makes sense. So in addition to the specification then, evaluation criteria and weighting. So I'll cover this very briefly, but it's basically how they will score the submission. So what you submit as part of your bid, that will be broken down and scored in a certain way. And the evaluation criteria, say, for example, may be the quality score, the social value score, the pricing score. And that's kind of what element 6 of the process covers. So quality, technical, pricing. There'll be things called, and this won't be the same in every procurement, but say, for example, I'm just going to use an example where it's quality and pricing which is being marked. So, for example, there will be, you'll answer the specific questionnaire relating to the procurement, but then as part of your actual submission, you will be asked, say, for example, 5 quality questions. Each of those quality questions will be given a weighting, which is what we mean by weightings in point 5. And that is how the overall element of quality will be broken down. So you'll receive, each question will have a score, and what you score for each of those questions will give you an overall score for quality. Then pricing will have another score. So you'll have an overall pricing. Pricing usually is, it may be that the pricing is broken down into 5 different elements. And again, each of those 5 elements has a certain score, giving you your overall pricing score. Then the quality and the pricing element will be brought together to give your overall score. And it may be, for example, that quality is given an overall score of 70%. And pricing is given a score of 30%. Overall, you're 100%. How you score for both of those elements gives you your overall score out of 100. I do hope that makes sense, but I'm not wanting to delve too much into that. If you would like to explore exactly how the evaluation criteria and weightings, how we do break down quality, technical, pricing, again, this is something that we can do in slow time if you do want to book a one-to-one session. We'll be able to look at an example of 10th documentation and how that's laid out. But we do also have some previous webinars where we do cover that in a bit more detail. So again, if you think that would be helpful, I do believe we've got it maybe linked in a slide later on in today's session, but if it isn't linked, what I will do is I'll send it as a link in the follow-up email. What we did back in March was we ran some lunch and learn sessions which cover different elements of the procurement process in more of a deeper dive than what today is. Today all we're looking to do is just give a quick run through the process and where you would find these opportunities. But again, moving on from there then. So in every opportunity, as well as the specification, as well as the evaluation criteria, as well as the specification, you will come across legal terms and conditions. So for any tender, our advice is to read these very carefully, as these are the terms and conditions for the work that you are agreeing to do and will form part of the contract. Again, at this point in time, for those terms and conditions, it is important that you do ask any questions. So if there is anything that you're unsure about that is stated within the terms and conditions, ask the clarification questions for the contracting authority to respond to ensure that you're not misinterpreting any information or leaving yourself open to a risk by not asking those questions. Also, if you are a member of Chambers or FSB, you will have the access to free legal support and you can ask any questions there that you might have, so that's support also available. But I think the best option really is going direct to the contracting authority. They are the ones who've drafted those terms and conditions, so should be in a position to give you the relevant answer, the information that you do need to be able to move forward with the decision as to whether you are going to be bidding for this opportunity. Finally then, before we do move forward then, coming to the feedback process. So all bidders will be notified once you've submitted a bid, whether you've been successful or unsuccessful, you will receive a response from the contracting authority to let you know the outcome of your submission. And whether you've been successful or not, for above value opportunities, you will receive feedback from the contracting authority where they will outline how you've scored in comparison to the winning bidder and how you could have possibly have improved your bid. So the new regulations, bidders will get a, so under the Procurement Act 2023, what bidders will get is an assessment summary. That's what it's called. It's called an assessment summary, and that explains the scores and rationale for how they've scored in comparison to that winning bidder. So I do see that we've got a hand raised. Bear with me just a moment. Oh, the hand's gone down. Dominica, did you mean to have your hand raised? I know I've managed to do this in webinars before myself when I didn't actually want to say anything at all. If you do have any questions, do just pop it in the chat for me and I'll come to it in just a few moments. But that does pretty much cover the process for now then. I'm going to move on because I am aware of the fact that I have been absolutely rambling and we are at 10:35, so we do have 10 minutes remaining. Not to worry, Dominique, it's fine. I've done that myself before, please don't worry. So as we did mention then, transparency under the Procurement Act 2023. So transparency is demonstrated under the Procurement Act through the new notice obligations regime, which spans the full life cycle of a procurement. So contracting authorities who are running their own procurement process are now required to publish more notices than ever at every single procurement stage. And that, as we mentioned previously, does include pre-market engagement and also contract management. So the number of notices, it's actually gone up from 5 to 15, and these are the notices that you can see on screen. So I don't have the numbered notices that you'd see them on the Find a Tender service, but we can take a look at those briefly. I'm not sure we'll have the time while I do the Find a Tender demonstration, but I'll see. If you've got any further questions regarding the specific notices, please do just let me know. But as we mentioned, all of these notices will be advertised on the central digital platform. And it's worth noting at this point that you will hear the platform, as I've mentioned many a times, central digital platform, Find a Tender service. All of these notices will be posted here. And our advice to you, as I've mentioned previously in today's session, is to ensure that you are exploring the Find a Tender service central digital platform, looking for these notices, especially those pipeline notices, planned procurement notices, and the preliminary market engagement notices, as these are the ones that will go live before the actual tender notice. It gives you an idea to be aware of the fact that something is coming up. If it's an opportunity that your organisation thinks, oh yeah, that's absolutely something that I do want to be involved in, it gives you some time to plan your calendars to ensure that you have the capability and the time free to spend some time on that bid and ensure that you are putting a quality offering forward. So I'm going to move on again from there, a quick overview of where in which you would be able to find opportunities. We have referred to the Find a Tender service multiple times throughout today's session, and that's where we are going to be heading off to next. Contracts Finder, I did mention Contracts Finder earlier in today's call, but as we mentioned, this is for lower value tender opportunities. Contracts with in the Scottish public sector is Public Contracts Scotland, and then Wales, we've got Sell to Wales, and then we've got eTenders NI for Northern Ireland. Central government contracts you would find via Bravo Solution. I believe this is also known as Jagger. This is a procurement portal, as I'd mentioned earlier on today, but the more you search for public sector opportunities, you will find that there are very many e-tendering portals which you will come across. You'll create accounts for them. My advice would be to maybe get yourself some form of spreadsheet for each of the portals so that you know you've got a login for each of those. You don't end up with duplicate logins. You don't end up losing passwords, and just to try and make the process simpler for yourself. So moving forward then to, we've already covered the central digital platform, but as we've mentioned, all notices will be published here that are above threshold. It's where procurement pipelines will be published. It is where the supplier information system is. So I did mention that when you register for the central digital platform, you will fill in a questionnaire basically, which is the supplier information system. And this will help to support the procurement specific questionnaire that we also mentioned earlier. And also the fact that the central digital platform is a mandatory registration for suppliers who are looking to bid for public sector work. As we mentioned, it is completely free. I don't mean free of charge. It's you don't need to register to be able to do the basic search. It is just when you are then looking to bid for work. And what we do have linked here, the YouTube link that you can see at the bottom of the screen, is a demonstration video. My colleague Jill runs through the full registration for the Central Digital Platform and that supplier information system registration. So do feel free to take a browse through that. And if you have any questions, please again do let us know. So time for the quick demo of the Find a Tender service then. So this is just going to be a quick fire demonstration. Bear with me a quick moment whilst I get to the correct screen. Okay. Can you all see the Find a Tender screen now? I do just want to check before I start getting too far ahead. Perfect. Thank you very much, Ash, for confirming. So to start the process of searching for an opportunity, then you will simply select the blue or white search button that you see on the screen now. There are a number of ways in which you can search for an opportunity, but the main way in which, or where you'd really get started, is just by using a keyword. So for my opportunity today, what I am going to be looking at doing a quick search for is catering, or for a catering opportunity, as I'm sure there will be plenty out there. And as you can see, when I search the word catering, it comes back with 4,350 notices. Now, if you're a catering organisation or you're looking for a catering opportunity, you're not going to have, or at least I assume, you won't have the time or ability to be able to search through 4,350 notices. So what we're going to look at doing is trying to whittle down what comes back. So the first things first, what I'm going to do is go down this little filter page to try and show you simple ways in which you can do that, but then also how you can get the results more specifically to exactly what you're looking for. And Ash, I can see that you've requested we do a search for IT. And what I will do is I'll do that next very quickly, just because IT is a really good one. Could you give me a more specific example of a type of contract or IT contract, whether it's something that you may be interested in providing? Because if I search, and I mean, I'll do it now just so you can see, if I search IT, it comes back with 199,000 or almost 200,000 opportunities. So we need to whittle that down quite a lot more. And what we do is say, for example, IT system, maybe. Using the speech brings it down to 52,000 notices, which again is a hell of a lot. So what we need to be doing is in that keyword box is we need to be whittling down. We need to be trying to be as specific as possible to the type of opportunity it is that we're looking for, because nobody's going to be wanting to look through. Okay, so would that be IT, managed IT services? Okay, let's have a look. So you see the two things that I'm doing here. I've added the quotations, but I'm also adding the plus marks between each word, because this from research turns out, because I was just searching managed IT services and it wasn't affecting, it was just bringing sometimes more opportunities through. Whereas adding the plus is meant to see it as a separate word, or word after word after word. So it should whittle down the opportunities a little bit further. And there we are. So using the plus signs brings it down to a specific search for managed IT services. So there's a few little tricks when searching Find a Tender service, and it's actually only quite recently that I found out that you can use the quote marks and the plus marks to actually get a more specific search result. But quickly, just before we do end up running out of time, the procurement stage. So if you're looking for just a pipeline opportunity or a pre-market engagement notice, you'd only select that type of notice. If we're looking for an actual open tender opportunity, we'd select just the specific tender box. Another thing is industry CPV code. So CPV code stands for Common Procurement Vocabulary, and it is basically a way, a way of classifying contracts in a standardized way. So when you browse these CPV codes, it kind of works like a branch off. So say, for example, agricultural, farming, fishing, forestry, and related products, you can narrow this down to something much more specific. So we'll go into cereals, potatoes, vegetables, fruits, and nuts. And then we whittle it down to just cereals and potatoes. That would bring you a much more, it would narrow down the search results quite vastly, because you're looking for something much more specific to just agricultural, farming, fishing, forestry, and related products. And that's basically what we are trying to do. Does award mean that, so Dominica, yes, so if it shows as award, it's awarded contract, yes. And if you open that notice, it should state the value of the contract that's been awarded and who it's been awarded to and how long for. No worries. And if that is an opportunity that you are then interested in, it may be worth noting those dates, so you know when the contract would be likely up for renewal, or when the procurement team would be planning for renewal of that contract, so you can try and get in contact with them to try and understand when that opportunity would again be going live. So again, I do really apologise. I have rambled a little and we are now at time. I will continue, but if any of you do need to pop off, I do completely understand that times may be restricted, but again, the remainder of the session will be recorded and I will send it across to you. But just to quickly finish up on